All right, let's jump into this deep dive. We're focusing in on something pretty crucial for those of you in the apparel industry.
Yeah, some big shifts happening.
Definitely big shifts, yeah. We're talking about digital transformation, which honestly has been a buzzword for a while, but now it's like really hitting the ground.
It's getting real.
And at the same time, you've got these sweeping tariff changes coming down the pipeline.
Huge impact.
Yeah, potentially huge, right? So we've got a couple of really interesting sources here. On the one hand, we've got this academic article exploring the nature of digital transformation in the fashion industry. Pretty dense, but lots of good insights.
Gives us a good framework.
Yeah, the big picture. And then we've got some recent news from Fashion Dive and Supply Chain Dive getting into the nitty-gritty of these tariff changes.
The on-the-ground reality.
Exactly. So our mission here is to connect the dots, right? Help you in the apparel industry understand how these two forces, digital tech and this new economic reality, might collide and what it means for your business.
And hopefully give you some ideas for how to navigate it all.
Exactly, because it's like a lot to process, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So let's start with this digital transformation thing. I mean, we all know Industry 4.0 is changing everything, but this article really lays out how that looks specifically for fashion.
It goes beyond just, having a website or an Instagram account. This is about fundamentally rethinking how the entire industry operates.
And it's not some far-off future thing either, right? Like, this is happening now.
Right, the pandemic definitely accelerated things.
Forced everyone's hand a bit.
Yeah, but even before that, the groundwork was being laid with these 3D BD technologies.
ADVD, okay, break that down for me.
Sure. So we're talking 3D modeling, VR, augmented reality, 2D and 3D scanning, digital twinning, all these tools that are basically changing every stage of the game from design to how the customer experiences the product.
And one thing that really struck me in the article was this idea of dematerialization.
Oh, yeah. Interesting concept, huh?
Yeah, like digital garments existing in a completely non-physical economy. That's a pretty big mind shift for someone used to making and selling, tangible clothes.
It is, but it's a potential future we need to consider.
Are we talking about selling more digital outfits for avatars than real clothes?
Could be.
What does that even look like for, an established apparel business?
A lot of questions there. And I think that's the right kind of thinking, being forward-looking. But even before we get to that, let's look at how these 3D VD technologies are already impacting the existing supply chain. Think about design and development.
Okay, yeah, that's the starting point, right?
Right. So with 3D modeling, you can have this totally integrated digital workflow, iterating on designs, checking the fit, visualizing different fabrics and colors, all digitally.
So you're not wasting time and money on a bunch of physical samples.
Exactly. And research actually backs this up. Papacristo and Balalis, DeMarco, they've shown how 3D modeling leads to less waste, faster turnaround, even more creative possibilities.
It's not just about replicating the old way digitally. It's about unlocking new things.
Right, exactly. Like, think about algorithmic design for made-to-measure clothing. Valino has done some work on that. Or hyper-personalization, catering to individual customer needs. Caruli's research highlights that, and all while potentially lowering your upfront costs.
That's got to be music to a business owner's ears, right?
For sure. Now, let's move down the line to production, the actual manufacturing.
Okay, so how is digital tech shaking things up there?
Well, for starters, the machinery can now directly read these digital models.
No more translating designs into instructions manually.
Exactly. So you get more streamlined operations, enhanced precision, better use of your resources. Peritella, Manchikatla, and Yarlagadda, their research supports this. And then you've got this rise of digital production on demand and localized microfactories.
Okay, those are some big ideas.
They are. Clark Sather and Cobb and Ashby, they've explored these concepts. So you're potentially talking about shorter, more agile supply chains, eliminating all that unsold stock sitting in warehouses.
Better for the environment, right?
And potentially even better working conditions. So, if you're thinking about ethical sourcing, that's a big plus.
Huge. So we've got less waste, more localized control. It's ticking a lot of boxes.
It is. And then, of course, we get to the point where the product meets the customer. Retailing.
The moment of truth.
Yeah. So Robertson and Silvestri, they've both done work showing how virtual fitting rooms can really cut down on those online return rates.
Which are the killer, right?
Yeah, for both businesses and the environment. But it's not just about convenience. It's about elevating the whole customer experience.
Like imagine using AR to see how that dress would look on you in your living room.
Exactly. That kind of personalized, immersive experience, it builds brand loyalty. It can really drive sales.
So it's not just changing how we make clothes, it's changing how people shop for them.
Absolutely. And on that note, the article also dives into how these digital tools are opening up entirely new business models.
So beyond just digitizing your current processes, it's about reimagining the whole thing.
Exactly. And it comes down to how you create, deliver, and capture value. Think about your key activities, how you design, how you source. Digital tools offer new efficiencies there. And your resources, your talent, your supply chain. Digital platforms can augment those. And partnerships, are there new collaborations you can explore in the digital space?
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is, but it's exciting. Then you think about delivery, your product offerings, your customer segments, how you build relationships with them in a digital world, your sales channels, all impacted. And then how you actually make money, your cost structure, your revenue streams. Again, digital tech opens up new possibilities.
So it really could be a complete overhaul of how the apparel industry operates.
Potentially, yeah.
Now, one thing that every business is thinking about these days is sustainability. And this article brings in an interesting angle. Cultural sustainability.
It's a dimension that often gets overlooked.
Okay, so beyond the environmental and the economic, what does cultural sustainability look like in fashion?
Well, UNESCO and UCLG, they define it as preserving creativity, traditional skills, cultural identity, heritage, those aspects of fashion that are often tied to specific communities and histories.
So how does a digital tool help preserve culture? Like I'm picturing 3D modeling a dress. How does that connect to heritage?
It's a good question. Think about how these tools can be used to share those traditional designs and techniques more widely. You can have collaborations between designers from different cultural backgrounds, leading to new innovative fusions while still respecting the origins. You can use digital archives to document and preserve traditional garments, textile arts.
So it's about using these modern tools to safeguard those traditions, make them accessible.
Exactly. Plus, the rise of personalized, diverse fashion expression in the digital realm. That can empower individuals to connect with and celebrate their own cultural identities.
That's a really cool way to think about it, using tech to promote cultural exchange and expression.
It's a powerful tool. Now, the article also gets into the practical side of things. How are different types of apparel companies actually implementing these digital shifts?
Give us some real-world examples.
Yeah, so they break it down. You've got your established players versus the digital natives, and then you've got everything from micro businesses to huge corporations. For example, the big luxury brands, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, they're doing external collaborations to drive digital innovation. PVH, they're fostering internal startups focused on digital. Then you've got companies like UTG, Emilio Pucci. They're doing more internal digital transformations.
So lots of different approaches.
Right. And then you've got the digital natives,
Yeah.
companies like Atticac, The Fabricant. They were born into this digital world. It shows that there's no one-size-fits-all path.
That's encouraging for businesses of all sizes, right? There's a way in.
Absolutely. And they also break down the supply chain transformation into 3 distinct clusters.
Okay, clusters. Lay that on me.
So cluster 1 is what they call partial digitalization. These companies are mainly using virtual garments for things like marketing, presentations, but their main production is still traditional.
Dipping their toes in the digital waters.
Yeah, exactly. Then cluster 2 is fuller integration. You see both virtual and physical garments, often supporting on-demand production.
Okay, so they're really embracing the digital but still making real clothes.
Right. And then cluster 3, that's the big leap. Fully digital, virtual-only garments, services for that non-physical economy we talked about earlier.
The metaverse fashion houses.
Exactly. So wherever you are on that spectrum, there's a model that fits.
And the article actually walks through how digitalization impacts each stage of the traditional supply chain.
Yeah, it's helpful to see it broken down like that. You start with research and design, where 3D modeling has obvious advantages in terms of speed, visualization. Then you move to product development and prototyping. And here, the comparison between traditional physical sampling and digital sampling is huge, especially when you consider the environmental impact.
Like, how much waste is generated by all those physical samples?
Exactly. And research from Xiong and even the practices of digital-only brands like DressX, they show significant reductions in waste resource consumption.
I'm guessing that lower carbon footprint is a major selling point.
Oh, absolutely. And then you've got presentation, how both B2B and B2C interactions are becoming more virtual. Think about virtual showrooms for buyers.
Yeah, it's all changing.
Manufacturing is getting more digitally integrated, leading to more made-to-measure options, production on demand. Marketing is getting more immersive with VR, AR, and then distribution and retailing, where virtual try-on and customization platforms like Unmade OS and Platform are really changing the game.
It's a complete transformation, top to bottom.
It really is. And along with all these changes comes some really interesting new opportunities.
Tell me about those.
Well, one exciting area is open source innovation. Companies like Atacac, the fabricant, they're sharing their 3D design files openly.
Wow, that's pretty radical.
It is, but it fosters collaboration, faster development.
Yeah.
Then you've got crowdsourcing, tapping into a wider pool of creative talent. The fabricant has been doing some of that. And then value co-creation, where brands like Hatch, Stitch 3D, Cine, they're involving customers directly in the design process.
So it's about building a more collaborative, more inclusive ecosystem.
Yeah, and potentially a more sustainable one. And the rise of virtual B2B platforms, that seems particularly relevant for the apparel industry. Things like Hatch, Sinai's Canvas, they're streamlining those crucial interactions.
So faster design cycles, less waste in the B2B sampling process, stronger relationships.
Exactly. And Stitch 3D, they're helping brands build their own in-house 3D product creation capabilities.
So bringing those skills in-house. Now, let's talk more about those sustainability benefits. We touched on reduced sampling, but what else did the article highlight?
Okay, so in design and development, the potential for a lower carbon footprint, less water consumption, that's huge. The DressX findings are a good example. 3D modeling also makes it easier to adopt zero-waste design principles.
Designing with sustainability in mind from the start.
Right. In production, you've got the optimized processes and the benefits of on-demand manufacturing. And in retailing, virtual try-on directly tackles the issue of high return rates, which we know is a big environmental problem.
Wins all around. And then there's that cultural sustainability aspect in design and development we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so it ties into that collaborative spirit, the formation of communities around digital design. Like Atacac, the Institute of Digital Fashion. It encourages team diversity, hybrid workforces, the development of new digital skills.
It's about adapting to this new world, acquiring the skills you need.
Absolutely. And then there's the challenge of translating the physical experience of materials into the digital. The look, the feel, the drape. Ornati's research touches on that.
So making sure those digital garments still feel like, well, fashion.
Exactly. And in the B2B space, this shift towards valuing experiences, it's interesting. VR and AR can be used for enhanced storytelling, which resonates with buyers.
Showcasing the brand story, the craftsmanship.
Right. And when you think about the holistic sustainability benefits of production on demand, especially in that cluster 2 model, it's pretty exciting. Less waste, potentially fair pricing, a cultural shift in consumer behavior towards customization, diversity, and maybe even bringing some manufacturing back closer to home.
So potentially good for the environment, good for workers, good for local economies.
It is. But, like with any new technology, there are some caveats, potential downsides. It's important to have a balanced view.
What are some of the things we need to be cautious about?
Well, there's the potential for increased consumption overall, driven by the ease of access to digital goods. Just because something is virtual doesn't make it sustainable. Crew, Weedman, others have raised this point.
So we need to be mindful of that, right?
Absolutely. And then there's the environmental impact of the ICT infrastructure itself, the data centers, the networks, all the devices we use. Andre and Edler, Freitag, they've done research on this. The article also points to the Jevons paradox, this idea that increased efficiency can sometimes lead to increased consumption overall.
So we need to be strategic, make sure we're actually reducing our footprint.
Exactly. So digital transformation offers amazing potential, but we need to approach it consciously, thoughtfully.
Absolutely. Now let's shift gears to this other big force impacting the apparel industry. These new tariff changes.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there.
Definitely. So April 3rd, 2025, big announcement from President Trump. We've been following the coverage in Fashion Dive and Supply Chain Dive.
Some pretty major policy adjustments.
Yeah, no kidding. So we've got this universal baseline tariff of 10% on all sorts of imported goods, which went into effect almost immediately.
April 5th, that was fast.
Yeah. And then on top of that, we've got these higher reciprocal tariffs, specifically targeting major trading partners and, a lot of key suppliers for the apparel industry.
So starting April 9th, we're looking at 34% on goods from China, a whopping 46% from Vietnam, 37% from Bangladesh, and 20% from the EU.
I mean, those are some serious numbers. Anyone sourcing globally, that's got to hurt.
It's a significant shift in the cost of doing business.
And it doesn't stop there. Right. We've also got the changes to the de minimis exemption.
Right. So as of May 2nd, that exemption, which allowed goods under $800 to enter duty-free, it's gone. at least for goods coming from China and Hong Kong, and there's talk of expanding that to other countries.
So even those smaller shipments a lot of online retailers rely on, they're going to get hit.
Yeah, it could really change the game for smaller businesses.
So what's been the reaction from the industry to all this?
Well, a lot of concern, understandably. The U.S. Fashion Industry Association, they've been vocal about this. They point out that apparel already faces pretty high tariffs, higher than steel even.
So they're saying this is disproportionately targeting the fashion industry.
Yeah, that's their argument. And they're also skeptical that it'll actually bring back manufacturing to the U.S. Only a tiny fraction of clothes are made domestically right now.
So they're not buying the whole bring back jobs argument.
Pretty much. And Steve Lamar from the American Apparel and Footwear Association, he echoed those concerns. He called the new tariffs inflationary and regressive, saying they're going to hit consumers hard, especially those on lower incomes.
So not just bad for businesses, bad for the average person buying clothes.
Right. And a lot of experts are questioning whether we'll actually see a big shift back to U.S. manufacturing. David Swartz from Morningstar, he pointed out that building new factories takes a ton of money and time. So even if some suppliers stockpiled goods in anticipation, if this drags on, there could be some major disruptions.
So a lot of doubt about the feasibility of reshoring.
Yeah. But there was one area where the reaction was a bit more positive, and that was the closure of the de minimis loophole.
Okay, so who's happy about that?
Well, ThredUp, they're a big player in the resale market, and they see it as a win for sustainability and fair competition.
Interesting. How so?
Well, they argue that it levels the playing field because fast fashion companies have been able to exploit that loophole, bringing in huge volumes of cheap goods, duty-free.
So it's kind of like a protectionist measure for more sustainable businesses.
You could see it that way. But Alice Price from Global Data, she's predicting some serious challenges for the big global brands like Abercrombie and Fitch, Nike, and also for value retailers like Shein.
They're all heavily reliant on global sourcing.
Exactly. So she's expecting price increases for consumers, potential supply disruptions, and maybe even suppliers moving production to other regions.
Trying to avoid those tariffs.
Exactly. But she also pointed out that moving production to the U.S. isn't so simple. We just don't have the infrastructure, and we're still dependent on imported materials.
So it's a complex picture.
It is. And William Blair, their equity research, they basically said these tariffs are specifically targeting the apparel industry. They could lead to a huge jump in merchandise costs.
Ouch. And Evercore ISI, they pointed out how much the industry relies on Vietnam, for example.
Yeah, a lot of brands source like 45% of their goods from there.
So limited alternatives, nowhere to easily shift that production.
Right. Now, the Yale Budget Lab, they did this in-depth analysis, and they really put some hard numbers behind all this.
Okay, give us the rundown.
So they estimate that the April 2nd tariff announcement alone equals a huge jump in the effective U.S. tariff rate, the highest we've seen since 1938.
Wow, historical levels.
And when you add up all the 2025 tariffs, it's the highest average rate since 1909. That's a pretty significant shift in the trade landscape.
Big changes. And what about the impact on prices, the economy overall?
Well, they're projecting an increase in the overall price level just from the April 2nd tariffs, and that translates to a real loss for the average household. When you factor in all the 2025 tariffs, that impact is even bigger.
So this is going to hit people's wallets.
It is, and specifically for the apparel industry, they're saying clothing and textiles will be hit harder than other sectors. They're projecting a big jump in apparel prices.
How big?
They're saying as much as 17% from all the 2025 tariffs combined.
Okay, that's not insignificant.
Not at all. And on top of that, they're projecting a negative impact on U.S. GDP growth, both in the short term and the long term. And they highlight the regressive nature of these tariffs, meaning they're going to disproportionately impact lower-income households.
So not good news on the economic front.
Not really. And they specifically point out that clothing and textiles are facing much bigger price increases than other commodities, like cars, for instance.
So the apparel industry is really bearing the brunt of this.
It seems that way, yeah. So to sum up this part of our deep dive, you're looking at higher costs, potential disruptions to global supply chains, and ultimately, consumers are going to feel it in their wallets when they buy clothes.
So here's the big question.
Yeah.
How does all this tie in with the digital transformation we talked about earlier? How do these two forces intersect?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you could argue that these rising costs might actually accelerate the adoption of digital technologies. Well, if importing physical materials and samples gets more expensive, suddenly 3D modeling and virtual sampling become even more attractive. They offer a way to cut down on those costs, reduce waste.
So necessity breeds innovation.
Exactly. And then there's the whole idea of bringing production closer to home, reshoring.
Yeah, could these tariffs make that more appealing?
They could, but as we've heard from experts, the U.S. doesn't have the infrastructure in place for large-scale apparel manufacturing right now.
So that's where automation comes in.
Right. Makers Row, the ARM Institute, they're talking about how robots, AI-powered automation, can make reshoring more feasible, increase efficiency, reduce the need for manual labor.
And ARM specifically mentioned the challenges of automating the handling of flexible materials, like fabric.
Yeah, it's tricky, but they're making progress. And Makers Row, they identified some key trends: AI, automation, on-demand manufacturing, localized production.
And those trends could really gain momentum in this new landscape.
Exactly. Especially on-demand manufacturing, because it helps you minimize the risk associated with holding large inventories, which could get hit hard by tariffs.
Smart. And what about digital-only fashion? Could that become even bigger if the cost of physical clothes keeps going up?
It's definitely possible. If real clothes become significantly more expensive, people might be more open to digital alternatives, especially for their online personas.
It's not subject to the same tariffs, right?
Exactly. So the digital fashion world might see a boom while traditional apparel businesses struggle with these increased costs.
And how do you think this is going to play out for different types of apparel businesses?
Well, the big established brands with their complex global supply chains, they're probably going to face the biggest challenges.
Hmm.
They might need to completely rethink their sourcing strategies.
Tear it down and rebuild it.
Potentially.
Mhm.
Smaller businesses, especially those that are already digitally savvy, they might have an easier time adapting. But they're still going to feel the impact of rising material costs if they're making physical goods.
And those smaller online retailers, they could get hit hard by the changes to the de minimis exemption.
Yeah, definitely something to watch out for. And then, of course, we have to consider the consumer. How are they going to react to potentially big price increases on clothing?
That's a wild card, right?
It is. Some people might be willing to pay more, especially for things they really need or love. Others might look for cheaper alternatives, maybe fuel the growth of the secondhand market.
ThredUp would be happy about that.
For sure. And if the economy takes a downturn, which is possible with these tariffs, people might just buy less clothing overall.
So businesses need to be ready for anything.
Absolutely. Be flexible, be adaptable.
So big picture takeaway for everyone in the apparel industry.
Mm.
Digital transformation offers a lot of tools to optimize your business, make it more sustainable, even explore entirely new ways of operating. But at the same time, you're facing some serious economic headwinds from these tariffs, which are specifically targeting your sector.
It's a time of great change, and navigating it successfully is going to require strategic thinking.
Absolutely. So a final thought for you to chew on. Given all these shifts, what are the most critical adaptations you need to make? What digital technologies should you be investing in? How do you need to rethink your supply chain? And are there any innovative business models, maybe blending the physical and the digital, that you could explore? It's about leveraging these new tools and responding to the changing economic reality in a way that not only helps you survive, but thrive.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Until next time.